Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. Many small churches and cemeteries across Quebec's Châteauguay Valley have disappeared from the modern landscape. In this series called Raising Spirits, we are looking for these vanishing places. Irish immigrants arrived in the Châteauguay Valley of Quebec during the 1800s, with a significant wave arriving in the 1820s and 30s. They sought a better life, free from poverty and harsh political and social restrictions, made worse by land clearances, evictions, and epidemics. The Irish who emigrated to Quebec included farmers, laborers, builders, and artisans, and religion gave structure and meaning to their lives, whether they were Protestants or Catholics. One such church began with such promise. It was called the first true Irish church in the Châteauguay Valley. It stood as a beacon of hope and faith and would surely stand the test of time. This is St. Malachy.
On the north bank of the Châteauguay, between Ormstown and Dewitville, land was slow in being cleared. James Sadler, who went on Lot 45 in 1835, says, "I moved on the lot early in the spring and put up a log shanty with a sheet for the door. I managed to chop enough to get in a lock of wheat, oats, corn, and potatoes, and after that we had enough to eat." End quote. Mageean and Pace were among the first on the river and were followed by Michael Furlong, who came in 1824 and was joined the year after by James Finn, who like him came from Wexford and whose presence led to the forming of a considerable Irish Catholic settlement. That fall or in the following summer they were joined by Patrick Mullen, John Murphy, John Scully, Patrick and Matthew Cavanagh, William Malloy, and Frank Hughes, who all settled within a communicable distance of one another. They were drawn together accidentally, for none had been neighbours in Ireland. Their struggles for the first 5 years were painful, owing to there being no timber on their lots fit for making potash. There were occasions when for 3 months at a time they had no bread and lived mainly on potatoes. Poor as they were, they manifested a laudable anxiety to have a place of worship, and in 1827 took the first step by fencing in a graveyard on Lot 40 given by James Finn, the first to be buried being a child of James Keegan's. In the following year, the contract was given to the brothers Wright to put up a church, which was so far finished as to permit of being occupied for occasional services. The first priest was a missionary priest, Father John McMahon from the St. Regis Mission across the border. In 1835, the church was plastered and finished, and for many years it was the only place of Catholic worship west of St. Martin, and was attended by the settlers of Huntingdon as well as those of Châteauguay. Because there was a mill in what is now Dewitville, but was then the Rapids du Portage, Irishmen and French Canadians gravitated around that area, and that's why the church was built here. On December 28th in 1840, Bishop Ignace Bourget came from Montreal to formally consecrate this little wooden chapel. At that time, it was recorded that there were 342 Irish Catholics and 167 French Canadians. The chapel was consecrated to St. Malachy, an Irish saint, and the record of this consecration was in English, which was a tribute to the Irish people. It wasn't until 1846 that the church finally had a resident priest, Father Terence Kiernan, originally from Dublin. A log house to the south of the chapel on the riverbank was built at that time. Father Kiernan left in 1852. Another Irish priest, Father Edmund Doyle, replaced him. Father Doyle continued to care for the church here, but much to the chagrin of the people here, he lived in Huntingdon. He remained here until 1856 when Father Louis Guillaume Gagne replaced him. Father Gagne remained until October of 1861 when the little chapel was demolished. What happened was Ormstown grew and Huntingdon grew. So the people in those two communities wanted their own church. And of course, those churches have been built. So this church was abandoned, and it was a simple wooden structure, so it was easily demolished. So that is what happened to this church in 1861. As Robert Seller recorded, he said, "The old chapel was leveled, and the only indication of its site are the tombstones in the disused graveyard." Now that was in the 1880s.
Hi, I'm Gerry Cavanagh. I've lived in Ormstown most of my life. I've moved around. I was in the American Army for 3 years and lived in California for a year or two, and that type of thing. But I always came back because I was an electrician, and I had my clients in Ormstown, so I passed the rest of my life in Ormstown. So. My great-great-grandfather was the one who came over from Ireland. There was a John and Honora Cavanagh and their sons, Patrick and Matthew. They took over this 100-acre plot, but one of them decided that he wasn't wanting to farm, so Patrick stayed, and then Matthew, he felt that he wasn't going to be able to survive here, so he moved. That's why there was a 50-acre farm, and the neighbor next door bought the other 50 acres. So we always had a smaller farm than the rest of the neighbors. My grandfather was born there, and my great-grandmother lived till 1907, I believe. And my grandmother, she died in 1930. We lived on, it was always the same farm. The house was an old log house. I have a picture of it there. That was right along the river, the Châteauguay River. But when we built a new house, it was built up closer to the road rather than on the riverbank. It remained in the Cavanagh name up till about 10 years ago. And our home was always, my mother was always liked to have visitors so we always had a cousin from Montreal with a bunch of kids, and we always had lots to eat because we lived on the farm. And no money, but lots of whatever, beef and eggs. And so the farm wasn't big enough. It was only 50 acres. So my dad, there was a guy next door who had a trucking business. His name was Williams Transport. And my dad got up every morning at 4 o'clock and got his truck, and he went up to Rockburn, which is about 15 miles, and he picked up milk. And when I say he was a milkman, he wasn't going door to door. He was going to farms and getting these cans of milk. And he did that from the time he was 28 till he was 64. So he always kept that land. Yeah, he always had the farm, and then my older brother ran the farm from the time he was a kid till he got married, and then he moved off the farm, and eventually my other brother took over the farm, and that was the story of the Cavanaghs.
My name is Patricia Mageean Martin. I'm known around here as Pat Martin. I'm just very interested in history. My connection to this place, my husband has a farm in Ormstown, but we settled in Dewitville and built a house there. And when my children were young, we would ride bikes to Ormstown. This is located midway between Dewitville and Ormstown. Really at the midway point, I would say, eh, Gerry? And when we rode bikes, this is 35 years ago, there were 2 huge maple trees here and a birch tree, and it was a shady spot. And we would stop here and sit on the step there, and I had no idea. I knew there was the church here, never connected that there was a cemetery. And my husband, Bill Martin, William Henry Martin, full name, lived all his life down the road. When he was a young lad of, say, 16 or 17, he was plowing for the gentleman that had bought the Finn farm, which is the neighboring farm, and this part was part of the Finn farm where the church was built. And he was just over here, he was plowing, and it was so rough. And he said to the man that owned the land, Harold McCaig, he said to him, "Why is it so rough there?" And Harold said, "Well, that was a cemetery." And Bill said, "A cemetery? Where are the stones?" "Well," he said, "they're from one end of the 138A to the other." What happened was, when the cemetery was abandoned, people would take the stones and use them for walkways or in cellars. So then I learned there was this cemetery here. So I went back and cross-referenced all the records that I could find, because originally there was missionary priests who came here. So they would have recorded when they blessed the graves or when they made the baptisms, they were often recorded at the St. Martin Church or the St. Chrysostom Church. So the people that I have here on the back of the names are anyone who was over 5 years old that was buried here that I could find. That was how I discovered this place. And what started was I visited Ireland. I always knew that my ancestors were from Ireland, but when I went to visit Ireland, and of course they have ruins everywhere, my aunt and I were in this old abbey ruins, and they bury people there, and there were flowers on this particular grave. I said to my aunt, "Oh, they're still burying here," and we hadn't noticed when we went in, but there was an older lady there, and she came over to us. "Oh yes, that was my sister." So she was like 95, and this lady was in her 90s as well. So, we gave her our condolences, and then she said, "Oh, yes," she said, "and where are your people from?" Well, I didn't know. I said, "From Ireland." Oh my, that was not the proper answer. She shook her finger at me and she said, "You do your homework before you come back." And so when I got home, I did my homework. I have been back. So I've done a lot of research, and I did not know, like I married my husband from Ormstown. My mother was originally from Huntingdon, my dad from Malone across the border. And I did not know I had any connection to Ormstown, because my grandmother, who was a Flynn, she lived in the present day. She never talked about the ancestors or, as opposed to my dad's family, who talked about them all the time. So when I got looking in the history, come to find out my grandmother's grandmother was Mary Jane McCaffrey from Ormstown. And there is a saying in Ireland that you don't really belong to a place until you have family in the graveyard. So I have family in the Ormstown graveyard, and I have family in this graveyard. John McCaffrey and his wife Honora Jones came here from the north of Ireland, County Fermanagh, in 1830. Their name is on the list of lots on the River Utard. This is the Châteauguay River. On the other side of that would be the Island Road, and then there's an Utard River, and the next concession would be the Utard concession, which was where John McCaffrey settled. He had 10 children. The interesting part about John was, when I was doing research, his first son, Thomas, who eventually settled in the States, was born in 1807, and then there's a big gap till 1817 when the next child is born, and then they came regular, just like clockwork. I was told that he was in the military, and he fought with the 27th Foot Battalion, which was a very famous battalion which suffered incredible loss in the Battle of Waterloo. 64% were either dead or wounded, 486. But Wellington gave them credit. They held his line in the center. Basically, they were cannon fodder. I'm sure my ancestor must have had incredible PTSD. How I came upon the stone for Mr. McCaffrey was, Mr. and Mrs. McCaffrey, I was good friends with Gerry's sister Rita Cavanagh, and she used to play with Madeline Finn, who lived in the next house there, and went to school with her. And she remembered, she said, when I started talking about this history, she said, well, she remembered in the cellar, there were cemetery stones. So the lady who lives there now, I saw her out one day, and she said, yes. And I said, because my great-great-great-grandparents were buried here, and their names were John McCaffrey and Honora Jones. And she said, Nora Jones. She said, that rings a bell, of course, because of the singer. So she said she was going to look and she would bring up what was down there. So she bought up these 2 fragments of the stone. So that's how I came to have this stone. And I thought it was so important that this man who had survived, the Battle of Waterloo, and, his wife that had these 10 children, that they not be forgotten. John McCaffrey was English speaking. My Flynn relatives who settled in the Huntington area, they probably would have been Gaelic speakers. And I know for sure on my dad's side and the Malone side, they would have been Gaelic speakers because in the census it says could speak English, couldn't. Other names from around here, Murphy's more than likely would have came from County Cork because Murphy is a Cork name. There's McCarthy's that settled here. They would have come from, again, County Cork because that's a Cork name. In the Huntington area, there were O'Connors. They definitely came from County Kerry. The Cavanaghs came from County Tipperary. So that's in the south of Ireland. So we're getting very Irish weather here as we speak.
Yeah, there was Irish, there was either, at that time, it was like Protestant and Catholic. So they didn't mix, We traveled actually we called it the Protestant bus, but it's just the way it was back then. And we'd walk to the other school and then back, and we had to always leave early from school because we'd get on this school bus because we were the only Catholics living on the road. And plus we were in a Catholic school with like French and English were separate. So there were about 40 English kids and there was about 200 French kids. So and the strange part is we never mixed, like I never learned to speak French. If we played ball or anything, we played the French against the English, and it just was the way it was at that time, back in the 40s and the 50s. I found the Irish people, they tended, because of the church, they tended to keep closer, through the years. You'd always remember like the Murphys and the Smiths and kids we went to school with because it wasn't a big school. So you knew the family story of every kid in the place. So through the years, I've always stayed friendly with them all, actually. The ones that haven't packed up and moved away, So we're a close-knit community, and they would always stick up for each other.
The church was so important to them because Irish Catholics were very, very religious. And that's what has come down through the generations, is that strong faith. When I went to Ireland, that was something else I did not know about. It's called the Penal Times, and it was from 1691 to 1760. And at that time, England ruled Ireland. Catholicism was outlawed. The priests were not allowed to say Mass, the people were not allowed to attend Mass. So the people that came here, the church would have been important to them because they kept their faith. In these penal times, Catholics couldn't own land, they had their land taken from them. If the priest was to say Mass, they went out in these secluded areas and there was a rock, and the priest would say Mass on the rock. The people would come from miles around to this secluded place. There would be a lookout to make sure that the soldiers or that they weren't reported. And that's how important it was to them to have Mass, to receive communion. And there's also the tradition of putting candles in the window. And the reason for that was it was a sign to the priest that that was a safe house to come to bring communion at Christmas time. And of course, the English would see this happening and they would wonder, they asked, what's going on here? What's with the candles in the window? Oh, they say, it's to show the baby Jesus it's a safe house to come, Well, they weren't lying. It was a safe house for the priest to come to bring communion. But of course, the British laughed at them because, the superstitious Irish. But that's how that tradition started. So that's why, as I say, it was so important for them, number one, to be buried in consecrated ground, and number two, to have a church and to congregate and to be, there were French and Irish then, I think probably mixed better than in the time that Gerry was speaking of, mainly because they all had to help one another because the work was so hard. You know, there was so much to be done, and they would have to work together, you know. So I think in that way, and the church again was a gathering point for them.
Yeah, the church was very important. Like my father was a church warden, it was called, and he was very involved in having this monument put up here. And when he found out about this church being here, and the people living in the house next door, their family name was Finn, Finn, and it's Irish, and they only had one daughter who went to normal school with my sister. So these people, I remember them going to church. They were much older than my dad, and when my father found out about this, because it was an Irish area, he went to the church and spoke about it, and they raised money to build this here.
Mr. Cavanagh's father advocated, and I'm sure the priests and the mayor, they commemorated the church because it was the first Catholic church in this area. So people from Huntingdon, people from Hinchinbrook, they would have come here from Ormstown, you know, because St. Martin was quite a ways away, St. Chrysostom was quite a ways away. So it was an important gathering point for people, and I think Ormstown, the church and the town, thought it was important to commemorate that.
For a few years it was kept up, and then it sort of got, you know, run down, and a friend of mine, George McKell, he was into history, and him and I came here about 15 years ago and started cleaning it up, and we cut some broken trees and we planted some trees. But then he got a bout of cancer, must be 10 years ago, and he passed away. He was my age. I went to school with him. He wasn't a Catholic, but he was into history at the Ormstown. Then it kind of, I didn't do much about it. I wasn't able to, and Pat Martin came along, and her husband did a lot of work on it and got us all interested in it again, and I'm so glad that they did, because Pat has gotten the names in the back, and there's a Cavanagh there, and I know which one it is. I often stop here and just sit, and I think of different things in my youth, you know.
I think it's so important that these people are not forgotten because they live very hard lives. Again, the Irish have a saying that a person dies 3 times. The first time is when your actual body, the heart stops beating and you stop breathing. The second time is when the corpse is consigned to the ground, when you're buried. And the third time is when your name is no longer spoken. And that's why I thought it was so important to document these people, have their names, there's French and English buried here, and so that their descendants can say those names once again and remember those people, because that's where we came from. When I spoke about the woman who said, do your homework before you come back, I never had an opportunity to thank her because she sent me on this journey. And I know this sounds like the superstitious Irish or whatever, but I find if people want to be found, they will be found. Like this, how that happened, you know, they'll reach out to you. I know some people believe that, you know, when you die, that's it. But I think the spirit, as you say, raising spirits, and I've raised a good many of them, happily, I must say, because I don't want them to be forgotten.